The blood-red sunset painted the dusty main street of Concordia, Kansas, as Sophia Patterson clutched the telegram that had sealed her fate. Her father's gambling debts had finally caught up with them, and now she was to be married off to Gregory Thornton, the wealthiest rancher in the county, a man whose reputation was as dark as the thunderclouds gathering on the horizon. Gregory's first wife had died under mysterious circumstances, but the whispers around town told a story of bruises hidden beneath high collars and tears hastily wiped away before Sunday service. It was 1875, and at 22, Sophia had always dreamed of marrying for love. The daughter of the local general store owner, she had grown up with modest means but grand hopes. Her mother had passed when she was 14, leaving her to manage the household and help her father with the store. Despite her practical upbringing, she had nurtured dreams of finding someone who would see her for who she truly was, not just a pretty face with auburn hair and emerald eyes, but a woman with thoughts and ambitions of her own. You understand what this means for us, don't you? Her father, Harold Patterson, asked, his voice strained as he paced their modest living room. The store, our home, everything would be gone if not for Mr. Thornton's generosity. Sophia stared at the worn floorboards, her throat tight. Generosity? Is that what we're calling it now, Father? Selling your daughter to settle a debt, Harold winced. That's not fair, Sophia. He's offering a proper marriage. You'll have security, a fine house like Mrs. Thornton had before she died. Sophia cut in, her voice sharp. Everyone knows what he did to her. Those are just rumors, Harold insisted, though his eyes darted away. You can't believe everything you hear in a place like this. Martha Jenkins saw the bruises herself when she helped dress Elizabeth's body, Sophia replied, her hands trembling. She told me. Harold slumped into his armchair. I'm sorry, Sophia. I truly am, but the wedding is in 2 weeks, and there's nothing to be done about it now. As the days passed, Sophia felt like a condemned prisoner awaiting execution. She went through the motions of preparing for her wedding, selecting a dress from the catalog, accepting the pitying glances of townswomen who knew exactly what awaited her in Gregory Thornton's grand house on the hill. One afternoon, while arranging a new shipment of canned goods at the store, the bell above the door jingled. Sophia looked up to see a tall stranger silhouetted against the bright sunlight. As he stepped inside, his features became clear sun-bronzed skin, dark hair that curled slightly at his collar, and eyes the color of a summer sky. He wore the practical clothes of a working cowboy, dusty from the trail, but he carried himself with a quiet dignity that immediately caught her attention. "Afternoon, miss," he said, tipping his hat. "I'm looking for some supplies. Just rode in with a cattle drive from Texas." "Of course," Sophia replied, straightening her apron. "What can I help you with? Coffee, sugar, maybe some tobacco if you have it," he said, his eyes scanning the shelves. "And information if you're willing to share. Name's Blake Anderson. I'm looking for work now that the drive's done." "I'm Sophia Patterson," she introduced herself, moving to gather his items. "My father owns this store. As for work, the Thornton Ranch is always hiring hands this time of year for the summer roundup." Blake nodded thoughtfully. "Thornton, you say? Big spread north of town?" "The biggest," Sophia confirmed, unable to keep the tension from her voice. Blake's eyes studied her face. "You don't sound too fond of Mr. Thornton." Sophia hesitated, then shook her head. "It's not my place to speak ill of him. He's an important man in Concordia." "Important men aren't always good men," Blake observed quietly. Their eyes met, and for a moment, Sophia felt as if this stranger could see right through her carefully maintained facade. The moment was broken by the store door opening again, this time revealing Gregory Thornton himself. In his mid-40s, He was an imposing figure, tall, broad-shouldered, with a meticulously trimmed beard that was beginning to show threads of gray. He was handsome in a hard way, his features sharp and his dark eyes calculating. "Ah, Sophia, my dear," he said, his voice smooth as silk. "I thought I might find you here." Sophia stiffened, her hands automatically clasping together. "Mr. Thornton, what brings you to the store today?" "I wanted to discuss some details about our wedding," he replied, his gaze flicking dismissively to Blake. "In private, preferably." Blake placed his hat back on his head, nodding politely. "I'll just finish my shopping then." As he moved away down an aisle, Thornton stepped closer to Sophia, lowering his voice. "I've selected the silverware pattern for our table. I expect you'll be pleased with it." "I'm sure it's lovely," Sophia murmured. "It was Elizabeth's favorite," he continued, a strange light entering his eyes. "Though she was careless with it, scratched a serving spoon once. Most unfortunate." There was something in his tone that made Sophia's skin crawl. She glanced over his shoulder to see Blake watching them, his expression unreadable. "I've also decided that you'll need to give up your work at the store once we're married," Thornton said. "A woman of your new station shouldn't be waiting on customers." Sophia's heart sank. The store was her connection to the town, to independence, small as it was. "But my father needs the help. Your father's concerns are no longer your priority," Thornton interrupted, his fingers circling her wrist. To anyone watching, it might have seemed an affectionate gesture, but his grip tightened painfully. "Your duty will be to me as my wife. Is that understood?" Sophia nodded, unable to speak past the knot in her throat. "Excellent," he said, releasing her. "I'll see you at the Miller's dinner party tomorrow night. Wear the blue dress I sent over. The neckline is most becoming." After he left, Sophia stood frozen, rubbing her wrist where red marks were already forming. She didn't notice Blake's approach until he spoke. "You're marrying him." It wasn't a question. Sophia looked up, surprised to find him still there. "Yes, in 2 weeks." Blake's eyes traveled to her wrist, then back to her face. "By choice?" she laughed, a brittle sound devoid of humor. "What choice does a woman have when her father gambles away their livelihood?" Blake was silent for a moment. "I heard things about Thornton in Texas, about his first wife." Sophia's eyes widened. "What things?" "That she fell down a lot, that she was accident-prone, that no doctor was called until it was too late." Blake's voice was low, his eyes never leaving hers. "People talk here too," Sophia whispered. "Then why are you going through with it?" "Because there's nowhere to go," she replied simply. "No money, no family beyond my father. This is the frontier, Mr. Anderson. Women don't have many options." Blake leaned closer, his voice earnest. "There are always options, Miss Patterson. Always." Before she could respond, her father emerged from the back room, greeting Blake cheerfully and effectively ending their conversation. But as Blake paid for his supplies and left the store, the look he gave Sophia seemed to burn itself into her memory, a look that carried a promise she couldn't quite decipher. That night, Sophia lay awake in her bed, thinking about Blake Anderson and the intensity in his eyes when he'd spoken of options. What had he meant? Running away was impossible. She had no money, no skills that would earn her a living elsewhere. And what of her father? Thornton would ruin him completely if she disappeared. The following evening, dressed in the blue gown Thornton had sent, Sophia sat stiffly beside him at the Miller's dinner party. The dress was indeed beautiful, with its scooped neckline and fine silk, but the too tight corset beneath made her feel like a trussed-up bird on display. Thornton kept one hand possessively on her back throughout the meal, his thumb occasionally brushing against her spine in a way that made her shudder. "You're awfully quiet tonight, my dear," he murmured as dessert was being served. "Are you feeling unwell?" "Just a slight headache," Sophia lied. Perhaps you should learn to hide your discomfort better, he suggested, his pleasant tone belying the steel in his words. A proper hostess never lets her guests know she's suffering. Elizabeth learned that lesson. Eventually, the casual cruelty in his voice made Sophia's blood run cold. She glanced around the table, wondering if anyone else could hear the threat beneath his solicitous words, but the other guests were engaged in their own conversations. As the party wound down, Thornton excused himself to smoke cigars with the men, leaving Sophia in the parlor with the other women. She slipped away to the garden, desperate for fresh air and a moment alone. The night was warm, stars scattered across the velvet sky like diamonds on black silk. She sank onto a stone bench, fighting back tears of frustration and fear. Parties don't agree with you either, I take it. Sophia jerked her head up to find Blake Anderson standing a few feet away, leaning against a tree. He was dressed better than he had been at the store in a clean shirt and vest, though he still looked out of place among the town's elite. "Mr. Anderson," she gasped, "what are you doing here?" "Got hired on at the Miller place yesterday," he explained. "Just finished helping with the horses, saw you come out here alone and thought you might want some company." He paused. "Or maybe you came out here to be alone, in which case I'm intruding." "No," Sophia said quickly. "I welcome the intrusion." Blake sat beside her on the bench, leaving a respectable distance between them. "That's quite a dress." "It's a cage," Sophia replied without thinking. Blake nodded as if he understood perfectly. "Miss Patterson, may I speak frankly?" "Please do." "No one else seems inclined to." "I've been asking around about Thornton," he said. "What I've heard confirms what I already knew. The man's dangerous." Sophia stared at her hands. "I know." "Then don't marry him." "It's not that simple." "It can be," Blake insisted, turning to face her fully. "I've been thinking about your situation since yesterday. I believe I can help you if you'll let me." Sophia looked at him skeptically. "How? You're a stranger passing through town." "Not passing through anymore," Blake said. "I took a job with the Millers, but I've also been offered work at the Double J Ranch just across the Kansas-Nebraska border. It's a day's ride from here." "And how does that help me?" Blake took a deep breath. "If you were to disappear the night before your wedding, Thornton would assume you'd run away. He'd be furious, but he'd hunt for you alone, not wanting the embarrassment of being jilted. If you had a head start and somewhere to go." "You're suggesting I run away to Nebraska?" Sophia asked, incredulous. "I'm suggesting you choose freedom over a life of fear," Blake replied. "The owner of the Double J, James Jenkins, is looking for a housekeeper. His wife died last winter, leaving him with 3 young children. He's a good man, Sophia, kind. Nothing like Thornton." "You want me to work as a housekeeper for a widower?" Sophia frowned. "That's hardly better than my current prospect. You'd be paid a fair wage, you'd have your own quarters, and most importantly, you'd be safe." Blake's eyes were intense in the moonlight. "It would just be temporary, until you decide what you truly want." "And what about my father? Thornton would take everything from him." "Your father made his own choices," Blake said gently. "And from what I've gathered, he's not entirely the victim he portrays himself to be. The gambling debts are real, but so is the money he's hidden away. He'll survive, Sophia." She stared at him, stunned. "How do you know this? How do you know any of this?" Blake's expression was grim. "Because Elizabeth Thornton was my cousin. I came to Concordia to find out the truth about her death, and instead I found history about to repeat itself." He reached for her hand. "You won't be next, I swear to you." The revelation hit Sophia like a physical blow. "Your cousin? But why didn't you say anything before?" "Because I needed to be careful. Thornton has friends in high places, including the sheriff. I couldn't risk him finding out why I'm really here." Blake's grip on her hand tightened. Elizabeth wrote to me about the abuse, but by the time her last letter reached me in Texas, she was already dead. Fell down the stairs, they said. Tears welled in Sophia's eyes. I'm so sorry. I couldn't save her, Blake said, his voice thick with emotion. But I can try to save you. The sound of voices approaching made them both stand quickly. Blake stepped back into the shadows just as Mrs. Miller rounded the corner of the garden path. There you are, Sophia dear. Gregory's looking for you. It's time to leave. Thank you, Mrs. Miller. I was just getting some air, Sophia replied, her mind racing with everything Blake had told her. As she turned to follow Mrs. Miller back to the house, she caught Blake's eye one last time. He mouthed silently. The day before, midnight, the old oak by the creek. That night, sleep eluded Sophia entirely. Blake Anderson's words echoed in her mind, tangling with her fears and hopes until she could no longer separate them. Was she truly considering running away with a man she barely knew, on nothing more than his word that he was Elizabeth Thornton's cousin? And yet, what was the alternative? A life potentially short with a man who had already proven his capacity for violence. Over the next week, Sophia found herself watching for Blake around town, hoping for another chance to speak with him. She saw him twice, once riding with James Miller to inspect some cattle, and once loading supplies onto a wagon outside the smithy. Both times, he acknowledged her with nothing more than a discreet nod, careful not to draw attention to any connection between them. Meanwhile, the wedding preparations continued. Thornton called at the Patterson home almost daily, bringing gifts and making decisions about their future life together without consulting Sophia. He spoke of renovations to the master bedroom, of trips they would take to St. Louis, of the dinner parties they would host. Each time, his hand would find its way to her arm, her shoulder, her neck never violent but always possessive, a constant reminder of her place in his world. 7 days before the wedding, Thornton invited Sophia to dine at his home. It's time you became more familiar with the house, he explained. After all, you'll be its mistress soon. The Thornton mansion stood atop the highest hill overlooking Concordia, a grand 2-story structure with white columns and wide verandas. Inside, it was furnished with expensive imports, Oriental rugs, European furniture, paintings in gilded frames. A middle-aged housekeeper named Mrs. Graves greeted them with a stiff curtsy, her eyes never quite meeting Sophia's. Mrs. Graves has been with me for many years, Thornton explained as they moved through the house. She'll show you the household routine once we're married. Dinner was an uncomfortable affair, with Thornton dominating the conversation while Sophia pushed food around her plate. Afterward, he insisted on giving her a tour of the upstairs rooms. This will be our bedroom, he said, opening a door to reveal a large chamber with heavy, dark furniture and thick burgundy drapes. Elizabeth found it too imposing at first, but she grew to appreciate its privacy. The way he said privacy made Sophia's skin prickle with dread. She stepped into the room cautiously, noting the absence of any feminine touches. It was as if Elizabeth had never existed. And through here, Thornton continued, moving to a connecting door, is my study. No one enters without my permission, not even Mrs. Graves, not even my wife. Sophia nodded silently, her eyes drawn to a heavy paperweight on his desk, a marble sphere that seemed oddly out of place among his other belongings. Beautiful, isn't it? Thornton noticed her gaze. It was a gift from Elizabeth's father when we married. Ironic that it should be the instrument of her unfortunate accident. Sophia's blood turned to ice. Accident? Oh yes, Thornton replied, his voice casual. She became quite hysterical one night, accusing me of all manner of indiscretions. In her rage, she picked up this very paperweight and threatened me with it. He lifted the marble sphere, weighing it in his palm. Imagine that, my delicate wife threatening me. When I tried to calm her, she stumbled backward on the stairs. Such a tragedy. He set the paperweight down and turned to Sophia with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. I trust we'll never have such disagreements, my dear. It was all Sophia could do not to flee the house that instant. Instead, she forced herself to smile back, to endure his hand on the small of her back as he guided her downstairs, to accept his kiss on her cheek as he handed her into her father's wagon for the ride home. 1 week, he reminded her, and then you'll never leave this house again without me. That night, Sophia made her decision. She would meet Blake at the old oak by the creek the night before the wedding. She would choose freedom, whatever the cost. The days crawled by with excruciating slowness. Sophia went through the motions of being a bride to be final fittings for her wedding dress, accepting gifts from well-wishers, listening to advice about married life from the town matrons. All the while, she was secretly preparing for escape. She sewed a small amount of money saved from her work at the store into the hem of a plain dress. She gathered a few precious items that could fit in a small bag. Her mother's locket, a daguerreotype of her parents, a book of poetry that had sustained her through difficult times. 3 days before the wedding, Harold Patterson found her packing a change of clothes into a bundle. "What are you doing?" he demanded, his face flushed from the whiskey he'd been drinking. "Nothing, Father," Sophia lied. "Just organizing some things I'll need to take to my new home." Harold's eyes narrowed suspiciously. "You've been acting strangely, girl. Don't think I haven't noticed." "I'm about to be married to a man I fear," Sophia replied, unable to keep the bitterness from her voice. "How should I act?" Her father sank into a chair, suddenly looking old and defeated. "I know you think I've betrayed you, Sophia. Perhaps I have, but what choice did I have? The debts. They would have ruined us both." "There's always a choice," Sophia said quietly, echoing Blake's words. Harold laughed humorlessly. "Easy for you to say. You're young, beautiful. The world is still full of possibilities for you. For me, this store is all I have, all I've ever had since your mother died." Guilt tugged at Sophia's heart. "Father, no," he interrupted, holding up a hand. "I don't want your pity, just your understanding. Thornton will give you security, a position in society. That's more than most women can hope for out here." "At what cost?" Sophia whispered. "Elizabeth Thornton paid with her life." Harold stood abruptly. "Rumors and gossip, nothing more. Don't throw away your future on the say-so of bitter old women with nothing better to do than spread tales." As he stormed out of the room, Sophia realized that her father had always known exactly what kind of man Gregory Thornton was. He'd simply chosen not to believe it, because believing would have meant acknowledging what he was condemning his daughter to. The day before the wedding dawned clear and bright, a beautiful June morning that belied the storm raging in Sophia's heart. The wedding dress hung in her room, a confection of white satin and lace that now seemed more like a shroud than a symbol of new beginnings. She went about her day as normally as possible, helping in the store, accepting congratulations from customers, smiling until her face ached with the effort. As evening approached, anxiety churned in her stomach. What if Blake didn't come? What if this was all an elaborate trick, or worse, what if Thornton had discovered their plan? At dinner, Harold proposed a toast to his daughter. "To your happiness, Sophia. May your marriage bring you all the joy your mother and I shared." Sophia raised her glass, thinking of her gentle mother who had loved her father despite his flaws. Would she approve of what Sophia planned to do? Or would she counsel obedience and duty, as so many women of her generation had been taught? "Thank you, Father," she murmured, sipping her wine and wondering if this would be the last meal they shared. After dinner, she pleaded exhaustion and retired early to her room. There, she changed into her plainest dress, fastened her mother's locket around her neck, and placed her small bundle of belongings by the window. Then she sat on the edge of her bed to wait, listening to the sounds of her father moving about downstairs and praying he would go to sleep early. At 11:30, the house finally fell silent. Sophia waited another 15 minutes before lifting her window sash as quietly as possible and lowering her bundle to the ground with a length of twine. Then, heart pounding, she climbed out onto the sloping roof of the porch below her window, eased herself to the edge, and dropped the short distance to the ground. The night was warm and still, with a 3/4 moon providing just enough light to see by. Sophia retrieved her bundle and set off toward the creek that ran along the edge of town, keeping to the shadows and starting at every sound. Once, she had to duck behind a water trough as the town marshal made his rounds, his boots crunching on the gravel of the main street. The old oak by the creek was a landmark everyone in Concordia knew, a massive tree with spreading branches that had stood for generations. As Sophia approached it, she saw no sign of Blake and her heart sank. Had he abandoned her? Had it all been a cruel joke? "You came." The voice from behind her made Sophia whirl around, her hand flying to her throat. Blake stepped out from behind a thicket of willows, leading 2 saddled horses. "I was beginning to think you wouldn't," she admitted, relief flooding through her. "I've been here since nightfall," Blake replied, his eyes scanning the darkness behind her. "Had to make sure Thornton didn't have men watching the house." "Does he?" Blake nodded grimly. "One, sitting in a wagon across the street. But he's half asleep, and will be long gone before he realizes you're missing." He took her bundle and secured it to one of the horses, then turned to help her mount. His hands were warm and strong as he lifted her into the saddle. "Have you ever ridden before?" he asked. "A little," Sophia replied. "Not well." "We'll go slowly at first," Blake assured her, swinging up onto his own horse. "But we need to put as much distance between us and Concordia as possible before dawn." As they set off northward, following the creek that would eventually lead them to the Nebraska border, Sophia felt a strange mixture of terror and exhilaration. She was leaving behind everything she had ever known: her home, her father, the life that had been planned for her. Ahead lay uncertainty, but also the promise of freedom. They rode in silence for the first hour, both too alert for pursuit to engage in conversation. The night was alive with sounds: the chirping of crickets, the occasional hoot of an owl, the steady rhythm of the horses' hooves on soft earth. Gradually, as the lights of Concordia disappeared behind them, Sophia began to relax. "Tell me about Elizabeth," she said quietly. Blake was silent for so long that she thought he might not answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was low and tinged with sorrow. "She was the kindest person I ever knew, always looking out for others, even when she was just a child. We grew up together in Missouri. Her father and mine were brothers. After the war, my uncle moved the family to Kansas, and Elizabeth met Thornton at a social in Topeka. He was charming, wealthy, everything a young woman's parents could want in a suitor." He paused, adjusting his hat. "I was working cattle drives in Texas by then. We exchanged letters, and at first, Elizabeth seemed happy. But then the tone of her letters changed. She wrote about feeling isolated, about Thornton's temper, about his rules for her behavior. The last letter I got from her, she was terrified. She said if anything happened to her, I should look at her husband. And then she died," Sophia murmured. 2 weeks later. By the time I got back to Kansas, she was buried, and Thornton was already being seen around town with various eligible young women." Blake's voice hardened. I've spent the last 6 months gathering evidence trying to prove what he did to her, but he's careful and he has powerful friends. So you came to Concordia to find justice for Elizabeth, Sophia said. Not to save me. Blake turned to look at her, his expression softening in the moonlight. I came for justice. I stayed because I couldn't bear to see another woman suffer at his hands. He hesitated. Especially not someone like you. Someone like me. Someone brave enough to choose the unknown over a life of certain misery, Blake replied. Not many would have the courage to do what you're doing tonight, Sophia. His words warmed her despite the chill that had settled in the air. They rode on through the night, stopping occasionally to rest the horses and share the food Blake had packed: bread, cheese, dried beef, and water from a canteen. As they ate, Blake explained more about their destination. The Double J is about 30 miles north of the border, he said. James Jenkins runs about 500 head of cattle and has some of the finest horses in the region. His wife, Margaret, died of influenza last winter, left him with 3 children ages 8, 6, and 4. He's a good man, but he's struggling to keep the ranch going while caring for the little ones. And he's agreed to hire me as housekeeper, Sophia asked. Without even meeting me, he trusts my judgment, Blake said simply, and he's desperate for help. The children have been running wild and the house is in disarray. Margaret was the heart of that home. What will you do once I'm settled there? Blake's expression grew serious. I need to finish what I started, find proof of what Thornton did to Elizabeth, make sure he faces justice. Fear clutched at Sophia's heart. That's dangerous, Blake. He'll kill you if he discovers what you're doing. Perhaps, Blake acknowledged, but I owe it to Elizabeth to try. They set off again as the eastern sky began to lighten, pushing the horses to a faster pace. By dawn, they had crossed into Nebraska territory, and by mid-morning they stopped at a small trading post to rest and water the horses. The proprietor, a grizzled man with one eye, regarded them suspiciously. You two look like you're in a mighty hurry. Just eager to get home, Blake replied smoothly. My sister and I have been visiting relatives in Kansas City. The man grunted, clearly not believing the story but not caring enough to press further. He sold them hot coffee and fresh biscuits, which they ate gratefully before continuing their journey. As they rode, Sophia became increasingly aware of the vastness of the prairie around them. Having rarely ventured beyond Concordia, she found the open landscape both exhilarating and intimidating. The tall grass rippled like water in the breeze, and the horizon seemed to stretch infinitely in all directions. It's beautiful, she said, breaking a long silence. Blake nodded. Different from what you're used to. Very. I've spent my whole life surrounded by buildings and people. Out here, it's as if we're the only souls for miles. That's the appeal of it for many, Blake said, the freedom to breathe, to live according to your own rules. Is that why you became a cowboy? Sophia asked. For the freedom, Blake considered this. Partly. After the war, I couldn't stand to be confined. Too many memories of prison camps. He glanced at her. I was captured at Vicksburg, spent 8 months in a Confederate prison before being exchanged. I'm sorry, Sophia said softly. That must have been terrible. It was. But it taught me something important, that the human spirit can endure almost anything if there's hope. He looked at her intently. That's what I want for you, Sophia. The hope of a better life than the one Thornton had planned for you. Their eyes held for a long moment, and Sophia felt something shift between them, a deepening of the connection that had begun that day in her father's store. This man, who had risked everything to save a woman he barely knew, was becoming important to her in ways she hadn't anticipated. By late afternoon, they had covered nearly 30 miles. Sophia's body ached from the unaccustomed hours in the saddle, but she didn't complain. Every mile increased their chances of escaping Thornton's reach. "We'll stop for the night at the next town," Blake decided as the sun began its descent. "You need proper rest, and we could both use a hot meal." The town of Willow Springs was little more than a cluster of buildings surrounding a stage coach station, but it boasted a small hotel above the saloon. Blake secured a room for Sophia and another for himself, cautioning her to remain inside until morning. "Lock your door," he instructed. "I'll be just across the hall if you need anything." The room was plain but clean, with a narrow bed, washstand, and single chair. After Blake left, Sophia poured water from the pitcher into the basin and washed the dust of travel from her face and hands. Then, too exhausted to do more than remove her boots, she collapsed onto the bed and fell into a dreamless sleep. She woke to sunlight streaming through the window and the sound of activity in the street below. For a moment, disoriented, she thought she was in her room above the store in Concordia. Then memory flooded back the escape, the long ride, Blake's steadfast presence guiding her toward a new life. A knock at the door brought her fully awake. "Sophia, are you ready? We should leave soon." Blake's voice was low, urgent. Sophia quickly splashed water on her face, straightened her rumpled clothes, and tied back her hair before opening the door. One look at Blake's face told her something was wrong. "What is it?" "Riders from Concordia arrived an hour ago," he said grimly. "They're asking questions about a man and woman traveling together." Fear constricted Sophia's throat. "Thornton, his men. They're at the livery stable now, checking all the horses." Blake's expression was tense. "We need to leave immediately, but not on horseback. There's a freight wagon heading north in 10 minutes. The drivers agreed to take us as far as Bluestem." Sophia grabbed her small bundle of belongings and followed Blake down the back stairs of the hotel. They slipped through a narrow alley between buildings and emerged near the general store, where a heavily laden wagon stood ready to depart. The driver, a weathered man with a thick gray beard, barely acknowledged them as they climbed aboard and settled themselves among crates of supplies. Within minutes, the wagon lurched forward and they were leaving Willow Springs behind. "How did they find us so quickly?" Sophia whispered once they were safely on the road. "Thornton must have discovered your absence earlier than we expected," Blake replied, his eyes constantly scanning the terrain around them. "And he knows these routes well. There aren't many ways north from Concordia." "What if they catch up to us?" Blake's hand moved to the revolver at his hip. "They won't take you back, Sophia. I promise you that." The wagon creaked slowly northward, the pace agonizingly slow compared to their previous days' travel by horseback. Every time dust rose on the road behind them, Sophia's heart leaped into her throat, certain it was Thornton's men in pursuit. But each time, it proved to be nothing more than a local farmer or a solitary traveler. By midday, they reached Bluestem, an even smaller settlement than Willow Springs. The freight driver let them off near the town's only eatery, a rough establishment that served basic meals to travelers and the handful of residents. "The Double J is still 15 miles northwest," Blake said as they ate a simple meal of beans and cornbread. "We'll need to find horses or another ride." "What about Thornton's men? We've gained some time by taking the wagon. They'll be looking for 2 riders, not passengers on a freight delivery." Blake's face was grim. "But they won't give up easily. Thornton's pride won't allow it." After their meal, Blake managed to purchase a single horse from a reluctant farmer, all the man could spare. "We'll have to share," Blake said. "It'll be slower, but we can ride double until we reach the ranch." As the afternoon waned, they set off again, Blake in the saddle with Sophia seated behind him, her arms encircling his waist for balance. The closeness was unfamiliar but not uncomfortable, and despite their precarious situation, Sophia found herself aware of the solid strength of his body, the scent of leather and clean sweat that clung to him. They rode steadily northwest, following a barely discernible trail through rolling grassland. The terrain was becoming more rugged, with rocky outcroppings breaking the smooth lines of the prairie. In the distance, Sophia could see the dark smudge of trees marking a river valley. "The Double J lies just beyond that river," Blake told her. "Another hour's ride and we'll be there." Relief flooded through her. "And you think we'll be safe there?" "James Jenkins doesn't welcome uninvited visitors," Blake said, "and his ranch hands are loyal. If Thornton's men come looking, they'll find themselves outnumbered." As they approached the river, the trail descended into a wooded ravine. The trees closed around them, shutting out the late afternoon sun and casting deep shadows across their path. The horse picked its way carefully down the steep incline. The crack of a rifle shot shattered the silence. Their horse reared in panic, nearly throwing them both. Blake managed to control the animal, wheeling it around to face the direction of the shot. "Run!" he shouted, pushing Sophia from the saddle. "Into the trees! Go!" Another shot rang out, splintering bark from a tree beside them. Sophia scrambled up the ravine bank, her heart pounding so hard she thought it might burst from her chest. Behind her, she heard Blake dismount, the metallic sound of his revolver being drawn. She crouched behind a fallen log, peering back toward the trail. Through the trees, she could make out 3 riders advancing slowly, rifles ready. Blake had taken position behind a large boulder, his gun aimed steadily at the approaching men. "Anderson," one of the men called. "We know you're there. Hand over the girl and you might walk away from this." "Miss Patterson is under my protection," Blake replied, his voice carrying clearly in the still air. "Turn back now and tell Thornton she's beyond his reach." Laughter met his words. "3 guns against your 1, Anderson. Those ain't odds I'd bet on." "Then you're a poorer gambler than Harold Patterson," Blake retorted. The standoff stretched for several tense seconds. Then, without warning, 2 shots exploded almost simultaneously. Sophia saw Blake flinch but stay upright, returning fire with deadly accuracy. One of Thornton's men toppled from his saddle with a cry of pain. The remaining 2 men scattered, taking cover behind trees. More shots were exchanged, the sound deafening in the confined space of the ravine. Sophia pressed herself flat against the ground, terror freezing her blood. A shout of pain made her look up. Blake was clutching his left arm, blood seeping between his fingers. Despite the injury, he continued to fire, keeping Thornton's men pinned down. "Sophia," he called, "keep going, follow the river north. The ranch is 3 miles beyond the Big Bend." "I won't leave you," she cried. "Go," he insisted. "I'll hold them off." Torn between fear and loyalty, Sophia hesitated. Then, decision made, she began crawling through the underbrush, circling wide to come up behind Blake's position. She moved as quietly as possible, every snap of a twig sounding like thunder to her ears. When she reached him, Blake was reloading his revolver, his movements hampered by his wounded arm. He looked up in surprise as she appeared at his side. "I told you to run," he said, though there was no anger in his voice. "I'm not leaving you to die for me," Sophia replied, tearing a strip from her petticoat to bind his arm. "We'll go together or not at all." A small smile touched Blake's lips. "Stubborn woman." "Determined," she corrected, tying off the makeshift bandage. More shots rang out closer now. Thornton's men were advancing, using the trees for cover. Blake handed Sophia his spare revolver. "Ever fired one of these?" She shook her head. "Simple enough. Aim and squeeze the trigger. But only if they get too close." His eyes held hers for a moment. "I'd rather you use it on yourself than let Thornton take you back." The gravity of his words struck Sophia like a physical blow. This was no longer about escaping an unwanted marriage, it was about survival itself. "I understand," she whispered. They crouched behind the boulder, watching as the shadows lengthened around them. The shooting had stopped, but Sophia knew Thornton's men were still out there, waiting, perhaps circling to trap them. "When it gets dark," Blake murmured, "we'll make a run for it. Head straight for the river. They'll have a harder time tracking us in water." Sophia nodded, clutching the revolver with trembling hands. The wait seemed interminable, each minute stretching like an hour as the light slowly faded from the sky. Blake's breathing had become labored, his face pale beneath his tan. The wound in his arm was worse than he'd let on. Just as the first stars appeared overhead, a new sound reached them: hoofbeats, many of them, approaching fast from the north. Blake tensed, raising his gun. "Could be reinforcements," he warned. "Get ready to run." But as the riders came into view, Sophia saw that they weren't Thornton's men. At their head rode a tall man with a gray-streaked beard, flanked by half a dozen cowboys, all armed and looking grimly determined. "Jenkins," Blake breathed, relief evident in his voice. The newcomers fanned out, quickly surrounding the area where Thornton's men had taken cover. The bearded man, James Jenkins, called out in a voice accustomed to command. "This is Double J land you're trespassing on. Throw down your weapons and come out with your hands up, or we start shooting." After a tense moment, two men emerged from the trees, hands raised reluctantly. One was bleeding from a graze on his thigh. Blake's shot had found its mark. "Where's the third?" Jenkins demanded. "Dead," one of the men replied sullenly. "Anderson got him." Jenkins nodded to his cowboys, who quickly disarmed the two men. "Tie them up. We'll decide what to do with them later." He dismounted and strode over to where Blake and Sophia were still crouched behind the boulder. "Anderson, you look like hell." "Feel worse," Blake admitted, struggling to his feet with Sophia's help. "How did you find us?" "Your horse showed up at the ranch about an hour ago," Jenkins replied. "Figured you might be in trouble." His eyes moved to Sophia. "This must be Miss Patterson." "Yes," Blake confirmed. "Sophia, this is James Jenkins." Jenkins tipped his hat politely. "Madam, wish we could have met under better circumstances." "Thank you for coming," Sophia said fervently. "I think you saved our lives." "Let's get you both back to the ranch," Jenkins said, gesturing to one of his men to bring horses forward. "That arm needs tending, Anderson, and Miss Patterson looks about ready to drop." The ride to the Double J Ranch passed in a blur for Sophia. Exhaustion, relief, and lingering fear combined to create a dreamlike state where she was only vaguely aware of her surroundings. She rode behind one of Jenkins' men, while Blake was helped onto another horse, his wounded arm bandaged more securely. The ranch house, when they finally reached it, was a substantial two-story structure built of logs and stone, with warm light spilling from its windows into the gathering darkness. A woman hurried out as they approached, plump, gray-haired, with a kind face creased with concern. "Land's sake, James." "What happened?" she exclaimed, then caught sight of Blake's bloody bandage. "Oh my goodness, bring him inside quickly." "This is Mrs. Whitaker, our cook and housekeeper," Jenkins explained to Sophia as they dismounted. "She'll take good care of both of you." Inside, the house was warm and surprisingly welcoming, with simple but comfortable furnishings. Mrs. Whitaker led them to a small bedroom off the main living area, where she directed Blake to sit on the edge of the bed while she examined his wound. "Clean through the meat of the arm," she pronounced after cutting away his sleeve. "Lucky it didn't hit bone. I'll need hot water, clean cloths, and my medicine box." While Jenkins went to fetch the requested items, Mrs. Whitaker turned her attention to Sophia. "You look done in, child. Are you hurt anywhere?" "No, just tired." Sophia replied, suddenly aware of how filthy and disheveled she must appear after their journey and the fight at the ravine. "Well, you sit right there and rest while I tend to Mr. Anderson. Then we'll get you cleaned up and fed. The children are already asleep, thank goodness, or they'd be pestering you with questions." Blake endured Mrs. Whittaker's ministrations stoically, though his face grew paler as she cleaned and bandaged the wound. "You'll need to keep this arm still for a few days," she instructed. "No riding, no lifting, no foolishness." "Yes, madam," Blake replied with a weak smile. After his wound was tended, Mrs. Whittaker showed Sophia to a small but clean bedroom upstairs. "It was meant for the governess, but we haven't found one yet," she explained. "The washroom is just down the hall. I've laid out some clean clothes that might fit you. They belong to the late Mrs. Jenkins, but I'm sure she wouldn't mind you using them in your need." Left alone, Sophia washed away the grime of travel and changed into the borrowed dress, a simple blue calico that was slightly loose but otherwise fit well enough. The act of cleaning up restored some of her energy, and by the time she descended to the kitchen, she felt almost human again. Blake was seated at the large wooden table, his injured arm in a sling, a plate of food before him. He looked up as she entered, his eyes warming at the sight of her. "You look better," he said. "So do you," she replied, taking the chair Mrs. Whittaker indicated, "though still too pale." "Nothing a good night's sleep won't cure," Blake assured her, though the lines of pain around his eyes suggested otherwise. Over a hearty meal of beef stew and fresh bread, Jenkins questioned them about their escape from Concordia and the confrontation at the ravine. Blake explained everything, including his relationship to Elizabeth Thornton and his suspicions about her death. "I've heard of Thornton," Jenkins said when Blake finished. "Wealthy rancher, political ambitions. Not the kind of man to let something like this go." "No," Blake agreed grimly. "He's not." "Well, you're safe enough here," Jenkins declared. "My land, my rules, and I don't take kindly to men who chase women across state lines." Sophia felt a weight lift from her shoulders at his words. For the first time since leaving Concordia, she allowed herself to believe that she might truly be free of Gregory Thornton. After the meal, exhaustion claimed her completely. She barely remembered climbing the stairs to her room, falling into bed, and drifting into deep, dreamless sleep. She woke to sunlight and the sounds of children's voices. For a moment, disoriented, she lay still, trying to place herself. Then memory returned: the escape, the gunfight, the arrival at the Double J Ranch. She was safe, at least for now. Rising, she dressed in another of the late Mrs. Jenkins' dresses that Mrs. Whittaker had laid out for her, this one, a warm brown that complemented her auburn hair. She brushed and pinned her hair as neatly as possible with the limited resources available, then ventured downstairs. The kitchen was a scene of controlled chaos. 3 children, 2 boys and a girl, sat at the table while Mrs. Whittaker attempted to serve breakfast and maintain order simultaneously. James Jenkins was nowhere to be seen, but Blake sat in a corner, his wounded arm in its sling, watching the proceedings with amusement. "There she is," Mrs. Whittaker exclaimed. "Children, this is Miss Patterson. She'll be staying with us for a while." 3 pairs of curious eyes turned to Sophia. The oldest, a boy of about 8, regarded her solemnly. "Are you going to be our new mother, Michael?" Mrs. Whittaker scolded. "Mind your manners." Sophia smiled, approaching the table. "No, Michael. I'm going to be your new housekeeper if your father agrees." "Can you bake cookies?" asked the little girl, who appeared to be the youngest at around 4. "Emma loves cookies," explained the middle child, a boy of 6 who was missing his 2 front teeth. "I can indeed bake cookies," Sophia assured them, "and pies and cakes too." This revelation was met with enthusiastic approval from all 3 children. Mrs. Whittaker shook her head fondly. You'll spoil them, Miss Patterson. But I won't complain about having help in the kitchen. These three keep me run off my feet, and that's not counting their father and the ranch hands. I'm happy to help however I can, Sophia said sincerely. After the dangers and uncertainties of the past days, the prospect of ordinary domestic tasks seemed wonderfully appealing. After breakfast, Mrs. Whittaker gave Sophia a tour of the house, a spacious, well-built structure with 6 bedrooms upstairs and comfortable living areas below. Though not as grand as Thornton's mansion, it was far larger and more comfortable than the modest home Sophia had shared with her father in Concordia. Mr. Jenkins built it for his wife when they married, Mrs. Whittaker explained. Added on as the children came. Poor Margaret, she loved this house, kept it spotless and filled with flowers in summer. Since she passed, it's been hard to keep up with everything. I'll do my best to help, Sophia promised. Your arrival is a blessing, truly, Mrs. Whittaker said, patting Sophia's arm. Mr. Anderson spoke highly of you in his letter. Sophia blinked in surprise. His letter? Yes, the one he sent ahead asking if there might be a position for you here. Arrived just 2 days ago. Said you were a capable young woman in need of a fresh start. Mrs. Whittaker looked at her kindly. We all need those sometimes, don't we? Sophia nodded, touched that Blake had thought to prepare for her arrival even before she'd agreed to escape with him. It was further evidence of his thoughtfulness and foresight qualities that were becoming increasingly important to her. Over the next few days, Sophia settled into life at the Double J. The children, starved for female attention since their mother's death, quickly attached themselves to her. She helped them with their lessons in the mornings, played games with them in the afternoons, and read stories at bedtime. In between, she assisted Mrs. Whittaker with cooking and cleaning, gradually taking on more responsibility as she learned the routines of the household. Blake, meanwhile, chafed at his enforced idleness. The wound in his arm was healing well, but Mrs. Whittaker insisted he rest for at least a week before resuming any strenuous activity. He spent his days on the front porch, watching the ranch operations and occasionally entertaining the children with stories of his travels. Sophia found herself seeking his company whenever her duties allowed. They would sit together in the evenings after the children were in bed, talking about their pasts, their hopes for the future, and the immediate concern of Gregory Thornton. You think he'll keep searching for me? She asked one night as they sat watching the stars from the porch swing. Blake's expression was serious in the moonlight. Thornton isn't a man who accepts defeat easily. He'll search, yes, but I doubt he'll find you here. Jenkins has made sure his men know to be on the lookout for strangers, and word has spread to neighboring ranches to do the same. What about my father? Do you think Thornton will take out his anger on him? Blake considered this. Your father's protected by his usefulness. The store serves the entire community, and even Thornton needs supplies. He may make Harold's life difficult, but I doubt he'd harm him outright. The thought brought Sophia some comfort, though guilt still nagged at her for leaving without saying goodbye. I should have left a note, at least. A note would have confirmed your willing departure, Blake pointed out. This way, your father can honestly claim no knowledge of your plans. 5 days after their arrival at the Double J, James Jenkins approached Sophia as she hung laundry in the yard behind the house. Miss Patterson, I wanted to speak with you about your position here, he began, his manner formal but kind. Sophia felt a flutter of anxiety. Have I not been performing satisfactorily, Mr. Jenkins? Quite the contrary, he assured her quickly. The children adore you, Mrs. Whittaker sings your praises, and the house hasn't looked this well kept since Margaret was alive. He cleared his throat awkwardly. I'd like to offer you the position permanently, with wages of $20 a month plus room and board. It's not as much as you might earn in a larger town, but it's more than generous, Sophia interrupted, relief washing over her. Thank you, Mr. Jenkins. I accept gratefully. His weathered face creased in a smile. Excellent, and please call me James. We're not much for formality out here. That evening, Sophia shared the news with Blake as they took their customary walk around the ranch yard after dinner. I'm glad, Blake said sincerely. Jenkins is a good man, and this is a good place for you. Safe. Something in his tone made Sophia look at him sharply. You're leaving, aren't you? Blake nodded, his expression regretful. My arm's nearly healed. I need to finish what I started in Concordia. Fear clutched at Sophia's heart. That's too dangerous. Thornton will be watching for you now. All the more reason to be careful, Blake replied. But I can't let him get away with what he did to Elizabeth. And now that I know he's searching for you, I need to make sure he never finds this place. How will you do that? By letting him find me instead, Blake said grimly. In Texas. Understanding dawned on Sophia. You're going to lead him away from Nebraska. Exactly. I'll head south, making sure I'm seen in towns along the way. Let word get back to Thornton that I've returned to Texas. He'll assume you're with me, or that I know where you are. And when he follows you there, Blake's hand moved unconsciously to the gun at his hip. Then I'll deal with him once and for all. Sophia felt cold despite the warm evening air. The thought of Blake facing Thornton alone, hundreds of miles away, filled her with dread. Over the past days, he had become more than her rescuer. He was her friend, her confidant, perhaps something more that she wasn't yet ready to name. When will you go? She asked, trying to keep her voice steady. Tomorrow at first light. So soon? The words escaped before she could stop them. Blake turned to face her fully, his eyes searching hers in the gathering darkness. The longer I stay, the greater the risk to you and the Jenkins family. Thornton's men could have talked by now, revealed where they encountered us. It's only a matter of time before someone makes the connection to the Double J. Sophia knew he was right, but the knowledge did nothing to ease the ache in her chest. Promise me you'll be careful, she said, reaching for his hand. Promise me you'll come back. Blake's fingers closed around hers, warm and strong. I promise to try, he said softly. That's all I can honestly offer. They stood in silence for a long moment, hands clasped, the weight of unspoken feelings hanging between them. Then, with gentle deliberation, Blake raised her hand to his lips and pressed a kiss to her knuckles, a gesture so tender, it brought tears to Sophia's eyes. You deserve happiness, Sophia Patterson, he murmured. A life free from fear, that's what I'm fighting for. The next morning dawned clear and cool, a perfect day for traveling. Sophia rose early, having slept little during the night. She found Blake in the barn, saddling the horse Jenkins had given him to replace the one lost during their escape. I thought you might sleep through my departure, he said when he saw her, his tone light though his eyes were serious. I couldn't, Sophia replied simply. Blake nodded, understanding in his gaze. He finished securing his saddlebags, then turned to face her. I've left letters with Jenkins, one for the marshal in Concordia detailing my suspicions about Elizabeth's death, and one for you in case. He trailed off, unwilling to complete the thought. In case you don't return, Sophia finished for him, her voice barely above a whisper. Yes. Blake stepped closer, his hands coming to rest lightly on her shoulders. Sophia, I want you to know that meeting you, helping you, it's given purpose to what was just a mission of revenge before. Whatever happens now, I'm grateful for that. Sophia felt tears threatening again but forced them back. I'm the one who should be grateful. You saved me from a fate worse than death. You saved yourself, Blake corrected gently. All I did was show you a door. You had the courage to walk through it. Before she could respond, he bent and pressed his lips to hers in a kiss so brief and tender it might have been imagined. Then he stepped back, as if afraid to linger any longer. "Goodbye, Sophia," he said, mounting his horse with the fluid grace of a man born to the saddle. "Not goodbye," she insisted, lifting her chin. "Until we meet again." A smile touched his lips. "Until then." She stood in the barn doorway, watching as he rode away from the ranch, his figure gradually diminishing until he was just a speck on the horizon, and then nothing at all. Only when he had completely disappeared from view did she allow the tears to fall. The days that followed were filled with work and worry. Sophia threw herself into her duties at the Double J, caring for the children, managing the household, even learning to cook some of Mrs. Whittaker's specialty dishes. The activity helped keep her mind occupied during the day, but at night, alone in her room, her thoughts inevitably turned to Blake. Where was he now? Had he reached Texas safely? Was Thornton following the false trail as planned? The questions circled endlessly, with no answers forthcoming. 2 weeks after Blake's departure, a rider arrived at the ranch bearing news from Concordia. He was a cattle buyer who regularly did business with both Jenkins and Thornton, and he brought word that Gregory Thornton had indeed left Kansas, heading south with several men. "Word is he's tracking down the cowboy who stole his bride," the man reported over dinner, offering a substantial reward for information. Jenkins exchanged a glance with Sophia across the table. "Any idea where this cowboy might be?" "Last I heard, he was seen in Oklahoma Territory," the buyer replied. "Heading for Texas, they say." Relief flooded through Sophia. Blake's plan was working. Thornton was following the trail away from Nebraska, away from her, but her relief was short-lived. Later that evening, Jenkins shared more of what the cattle buyer had told him privately. "Thornton's not just offering money for information," he said gravely. "He's hired gunmen, professional killers. He wants Anderson dead, Sophia, and he wants you brought back alive." Fear gripped her anew. "Blake doesn't know about the gunmen." "No, and there's no way to warn him," Jenkins confirmed. "All we can do is hope he's careful and keeps moving." Another week passed with no word. Then, too, Sophia found herself watching the horizon each day, hoping for the sight of a rider approaching from the south. But none came. A month after Blake's departure, Sophia was helping Michael with his reading lesson when they heard the sound of horses approaching. Jenkins, who had been working nearby, went to the window. "Riders coming," he announced. 4 of them. Sophia's heart leapt. Could Blake have returned with companions? But Jenkins' next words dashed her hopes. "Don't recognize them." "Michael, go tell your brothers and sister to stay upstairs with Mrs. Whittaker. Sophia, you might want to join them." But Sophia shook her head. "If they're Thornton's men, hiding won't help. He'll tear the house apart looking for me." Jenkins gave her a measuring look, then nodded. "All right. But stay behind me." They stepped onto the front porch just as the riders entered the ranch yard. They were rough-looking men, trail-worn and heavily armed. The leader, a tall man with a scar running down one cheek, reined in his horse and touched the brim of his hat in a mockery of politeness. "Afternoon, folks. This the Double J Ranch, it is," Jenkins replied evenly. "I'm James Jenkins. What can I do for you gentlemen?" The scarred man's eyes moved past Jenkins to Sophia, a slow smile spreading across his face. "Well now, I believe you can help us after all. We're looking for a young lady who might be staying here. Auburn hair, green eyes, goes by the name of Sophia Patterson." Sophia felt her blood turn to ice, but she kept her expression neutral, meeting the man's gaze steadily. Jenkins shifted subtly, placing himself more firmly between Sophia and the riders. "May I ask why you're looking for such a person?" "Her fiancé is mighty worried about her," the man replied, his tone falsely concerned. "She disappeared right before their wedding day. Mr. Thornton has been searching high and low." "I see," Jenkins said. "And you work for Mr. Thornton, in a manner of speaking," the man acknowledged. "He's paying us to find his bride and bring her home, also to deal with the man who took her, a cowboy named Blake Anderson." At Blake's name, Sophia couldn't suppress a small gasp. The scarred man's eyes narrowed, focusing on her more intently. "You know him, madam, Anderson." Before Sophia could respond, Jenkins spoke. "My niece is easily startled by strangers, especially armed men who ride onto private property unannounced. Now, I'm afraid I can't help you gentlemen. There's no Sophia Patterson here." The scarred man's smile disappeared. "I think you're lying, Jenkins." "I think that's her standing right behind you." "This is my niece, Sarah," Jenkins said firmly. "And you're trespassing. I suggest you move on." For a tense moment, it seemed the scarred man might challenge Jenkins' statement. His hand hovered near his holstered gun. But then, surprisingly, he shrugged and backed down. "My mistake," he said, though his eyes told a different story. "We'll be on our way then. Sorry to trouble you." As the riders turned their horses to leave, the scarred man called back over his shoulder. "By the way, if you do happen to come across Anderson, you might want to let him know that his cousin's killer is looking for him. They've got unfinished business." After they disappeared from view, Jenkins turned to Sophia, his expression grim. "They'll be back. They didn't believe me for a second." "What do we do?" Sophia asked, her voice surprisingly steady despite her fear. Jenkins considered for a moment. "We prepare, and we wait." The ranch transformed into a defensive stronghold over the next few hours. Jenkins called in all his hands from the far pastures, armed them, and positioned them around the property. The children and Mrs. Whitaker were moved to a root cellar beneath the barn, uncomfortable but virtually invisible from outside. Sophia refused to join them, insisting on remaining in the house where she could keep watch. "They're coming for me," she told Jenkins when he tried to persuade her to hide. "I won't put everyone at risk while I cower in a cellar." Night fell, bringing with it an eerie silence. The usual sounds of the ranch cattle lowing in the distance, horses shifting in the corral, ranch hands calling to one another had all been muted or eliminated. Everyone waited, tense and watchful, for the attack they knew was coming. It began just after midnight, a sudden volley of gunfire from the direction of the bunkhouse, followed by shouts and more shooting. Jenkins, who had been dozing in a chair near the front window, was instantly alert. "They're trying to draw us out," he said grimly, checking his rifle. "Stay down, Sophia." The gunfire continued sporadically for what seemed like hours but was probably only minutes. Then, abruptly, it stopped. The silence that followed was somehow more terrifying than the noise had been. A voice called from the darkness. "Jenkins, send out the woman and we'll let your men live." Jenkins moved to the door, opening it just enough to shout back. "My men are just fine, and no one's coming out." The response was another burst of gunfire, this time directed at the house itself. Bullets thudded into the logs, some penetrating enough to send splinters flying inside. Sophia crouched lower behind the heavy oak table Jenkins had overturned for protection. "They're trying to scare us," Jenkins muttered, though he looked concerned. "Problem is, it's working." "If they set fire to the house." He didn't need to finish the thought. A wooden house would burn quickly, trapping them inside. More shots rang out, but these seemed to be coming from a different direction from beyond the ranch yard. Confused shouts followed, then the sound of running horses. "What's happening?" Sophia whispered. Jenkins peered cautiously through a window. "Someone's attacking them from behind. I can't see who," a familiar voice called out from the darkness. "Jenkins, it's Anderson. Are you all right in there?" Relief washed over Sophia in a dizzying wave. "Blake," she breathed. "He's back." Jenkins yanked open the front door. "We're fine. Thornton's men, 3 down, 1 running," Blake's voice replied. "It's safe to come out." Sophia was through the door before Jenkins could stop her, rushing out onto the porch. The scene before her was chaotic. Several of Jenkins' ranch hands were emerging from their positions, rifles still at the ready. 3 bodies lay motionless in the dirt of the ranch yard. And there, dismounting from his horse near the corral, was Blake Anderson. He looked different, thinner, his face weathered by sun and wind, with a new scar visible at his temple. But his eyes, when they found her, were the same clear blue and filled with an emotion that made Sophia's heart race. She ran to him without thought or hesitation, and he caught her in his arms, lifting her off her feet in an embrace that spoke of relief and something deeper, something neither of them had dared name before he left. "You're here," she murmured against his neck. "You came back." "I promised, didn't I?" His voice was rough with exhaustion but warm with feeling. Jenkins approached, extending his hand to Blake. "Your timing is impeccable, Anderson. Another few minutes and they might have set the house alight." Blake clasped his hand firmly. "I've been tracking them for 3 days. When I realized where they were headed, I pushed hard to catch up." "Thornton?" Sophia asked, suddenly fearful again. "Is he with them?" Blake's expression hardened. "No, he sent these men ahead while he remains in Texas, building his alibi. If they succeeded in capturing you, he would have claimed no knowledge of their actions." "Coward," Jenkins spat. "Clever," Blake corrected grimly. "He's always careful to keep his hands clean." The cleanup from the night's violence took hours. 2 of Thornton's men were dead, 1 wounded but alive, and 1 had escaped into the darkness. The wounded man, once his injuries were tended, revealed that Thornton had hired a total of 6 men to find Sophia and kill Blake. "The other 2 are probably still in town," he said, eyeing the cup of water Mrs. Whittaker had brought him warily, as if expecting poison, "waiting to hear from us." Jenkins dispatched several ranch hands to alert the nearest law enforcement, a deputy marshal stationed in a town 20 miles away. "We'll let the law handle this properly," he declared. "No vigilante justice on my ranch." As dawn broke, Sophia found herself sitting on the porch steps beside Blake, both of them too weary for sleep but too relieved to separate. They watched the sun rise over the eastern prairie, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink. "Tell me what happened after you left," Sophia said eventually. "How did you end up back here?" Blake sighed, rubbing a hand across his face. "I made sure to be seen heading south, stopping in towns along the way, asking questions about cattle drives to Texas. The plan worked. Thornton followed, just as we hoped. I led him all the way to San Antonio before doubling back through Indian Territory. And the gunmen? I didn't know about them until I reached a town in southern Nebraska," Blake admitted. "Heard talk about 4 hard cases, asking questions about a woman matching your description. I realized they were ahead of me, heading north while Thornton stayed behind in Texas." Sophia shuddered at how close they'd come to disaster. "If you hadn't returned when you did." "But I did," Blake said firmly, taking her hand in his. "And now we need to end this for good." "How? Thornton is still out there." Blake's expression was resolute. "I found what I was looking for in Texas, evidence of Thornton's guilt in Elizabeth's death. A witness who was paid to keep quiet. And now we have his hired guns attempting murder on Nebraska soil. It's enough to bring charges, Sophia. Real ones that even his money can't make disappear." Hope flared in Sophia's heart for the first time since her escape. "You really think he'll face justice?" "I do," Blake affirmed. "It won't bring Elizabeth back, but it will ensure he never hurts another woman." They sat in companionable silence as the ranch came to life around them, ranch hands heading out to their daily tasks, Mrs. Whittaker starting breakfast in the kitchen, the children emerging sleepy-eyed to marvel at the night's excitement. "What will you do now?" Sophia asked finally, the question that had been weighing on her mind. "After Thornton is dealt with," Blake turned to look at her, his expression softening. "That depends." "On what?" "On you," he said simply. "On whether there might be a place for me in the life you're building here." Sophia's heart seemed to stop, then race ahead. "Are you asking to court me, Mr. Anderson?" A smile played at the corners of his mouth. "I believe I am, Miss Patterson, if you're amenable." "I am," she replied, her own smile breaking through like sunshine after rain. "Very amenable indeed." The journey to justice was neither quick nor easy. The wounded gunman was taken into custody by the deputy marshal, and his testimony, given in exchange for leniency, provided a crucial link between the attack and Gregory Thornton. Blake traveled to Concordia with the marshal, bringing with him affidavits from the Texas witness about Elizabeth's death. Sophia remained at the Double J, continuing her work as housekeeper and forming ever-stronger bonds with the Jenkins children. Though worried for Blake's safety, she trusted in his promise to return, a promise he had already kept once against considerable odds. 3 weeks later, he rode back to the ranch with news that vindicated all their hopes and fears. Gregory Thornton had been arrested in Texas and extradited to Kansas to face charges of conspiracy to commit kidnapping and murder. The evidence about Elizabeth's death, while circumstantial, was enough to open a formal investigation. Thornton's carefully constructed facade of respectability was crumbling rapidly as associates distanced themselves, and previously silenced witnesses came forward. "He'll likely spend years in prison," Blake told Sophia as they walked together through a meadow blooming with wildflowers. "And even if he eventually goes free, his reputation and fortune will be destroyed." "And my father?" Sophia asked, though she had almost stopped thinking of Harold Patterson as such. "How is he?" "Chastened," Blake replied. "The scandal has affected his business, but he'll survive." "He asked about you," seemed genuinely concerned. Sophia nodded, not sure how she felt about that. The man who had been willing to sell her to Thornton was still her father, still the only family she had left. Perhaps in time some form of reconciliation might be possible, but not yet. "And what about you?" she asked, turning to face Blake fully. "Now that your quest for justice is complete, what will you do?" Blake took both her hands in his expression earnest. "I've been offered a permanent position here at the Double J. Jenkins needs a foreman, and he thinks I'm the man for the job." Joy bubbled up in Sophia's heart. "You're staying?" "If that's what you want," Blake said, his eyes searching hers. "These past months, getting to know you, watching you build a new life here, it's made me realize what I really want. Not vengeance or wandering, but a home, a purpose." He paused, his thumbs tracing gentle circles on her palms. "A future with you if you'll have me." Sophia felt tears spring to her eyes, but they were tears of happiness. "I want that too," she whispered, "more than anything." Blake's smile was radiant as he drew her into his arms. This time, their kiss was neither brief nor tentative, but a promise of everything to come, a life built together, free from fear, rich with love and possibility. They were married that autumn, in a simple ceremony at the Double J with Jenkins and his children, Mrs. Whittaker, and the ranch hands in attendance. Sophia wore a dress of cream-colored silk that Mrs. Whittaker had helped her sew, with wildflowers in her hair instead of a veil. Blake, standing tall and proud in a new suit, looked at her as if she were the most precious thing in the world as they spoke their vows beneath the same old oak tree where they had once planned her escape. As the seasons changed and life settled into its new patterns. The horrors of the past gradually receded. News came periodically from Concordia, Thornton convicted and sentenced to 15 years in prison. Harold Patterson selling the store and moving to St. Louis. Elizabeth's parents writing to thank Blake for bringing their daughter's killer to justice. The Double J prospered under Jenkins' ownership and Blake's management. Sophia continued to care for the household and the children, who flourished under her guidance. In the evenings, she and Blake would sit on the porch, watching the sun set over the Nebraska prairie, talking of small daily concerns and large future dreams. In the spring of their second year of marriage, Sophia shared the news they had both been hoping for a child would join their family by winter. Blake's joy was boundless. His protective instincts immediately engaged as he insisted she rest more and work less, much to Sophia's amused frustration. "I'm with child, not made of glass," she reminded him repeatedly, though she secretly cherished his concern. Their son, William James Anderson, was born on a snowy December night, with Mrs. Whittaker serving as midwife and Blake pacing anxiously outside the bedroom door. When finally allowed to enter, he approached the bed with reverence, gazing in wonder at the tiny red face nestled against Sophia's breast. "He's perfect," he whispered, gently touching the downy head. "Like his mother." Sophia smiled tiredly up at him. "He has your eyes, I think. And hopefully your steady nature." "God help us if he inherits your stubbornness," Blake teased, but his voice was thick with emotion. As their family grew a daughter, Elizabeth Margaret, joining them 2 years later, followed by another son, Robert Harold the Double J became less their workplace and more truly their home. James Jenkins, watching his surrogate grandchildren grow alongside his own children, eventually proposed a formal partnership that would make Blake part owner of the ranch. "You've earned it," he told Blake, "and my own children will need steady guidance when I'm gone. I can think of no one I'd trust more with their future and the future of this land." Life on the frontier was never easy. There were droughts and blizzards, economic hardships and personal sorrows. Mrs. Whittaker passed peacefully in her sleep one winter, leaving a hole in their hearts that took time to heal. Jenkins' oldest son, Michael, was badly injured in a riding accident but recovered with Sophia's devoted nursing. Through it all, Blake and Sophia faced each challenge together, their love deepening with shared experiences and mutual respect. They never forgot how their story began with danger, sacrifice, and a promise made in desperate circumstances. But they also never allowed the shadow of Gregory Thornton to darken the life they had built. When news reached them that Thornton had died in prison, 10 years into his sentence, they acknowledged it quietly and moved on, refusing to let his memory intrude any further into their happiness. On the 20th anniversary of their wedding, Blake surprised Sophia with a gift, a small house built on a rise overlooking the Double J, designed especially for them now that their children were grown or nearly so. William was attending university in St. Louis. Elizabeth was engaged to a neighboring rancher's son, and young Robert, at 16, was already showing signs of wanting to follow in his father's footsteps as a rancher. "Our own place," Sophia said wonderingly as they stood on the porch of the new house, watching the sun set in a blaze of color. "After all these years." "Do you remember what I told you that night in the ravine?" Blake asked, his arm around her waist. "When Thornton's men had us trapped." Sophia nodded, the memory still vivid despite the passage of time. "You said I wouldn't be next. You swore to protect me." "And I meant it," Blake said, turning her to face him. His hair was streaked with gray now, lines of experience etched around his eyes, but to Sophia, he was as handsome as the day he'd walked into her father's store. Every day since then, I've tried to keep that promise, not just to protect you from harm, but to give you the life you deserve." "You've done that and more," Sophia assured him, reaching up to touch his face tenderly. "You gave me freedom when I was trapped, hope when I had none, and love when I least expected it." Blake caught her hand and pressed a kiss to her palm, a gesture that had become familiar over their years together, but had never lost its power to touch her heart. "I love you, Sophia Anderson," he said simply, "more with each passing day." "And I love you," she replied, standing on tiptoe to kiss him as the last rays of sunlight gilded the land around them, their land, their home, their future stretching out before them as vast and promising as the Nebraska sky. In the years that followed, they watched their grandchildren take their first steps on the same soil where they had once fled for their lives. They saw the frontier gradually tamed, railways and telegraph lines connecting their once isolated community to the wider world. They weathered personal losses, Jenkins' passing, the death of their middle child Elizabeth in childbirth, and celebrated Joyce Williams' successful medical practice, Robert's marriage and partnership in the ranch. Through it all, they remained each other's constant, the love that had begun with a desperate promise growing deeper and stronger with each passing season. And on quiet evenings, they would sometimes speak of those early days, the young woman trapped in an unwanted betrothal, the determined cowboy who vowed she wouldn't share Elizabeth Thornton's fate. "You kept your promise," Sophia would say, her head resting on Blake's shoulder as they watched the stars emerge above their home. "As did you," he would reply, his voice still strong despite his advancing years. "You chose freedom. You chose life." And together, they had built a life worthy of that choice, one filled with love, family, purpose, and the quiet happiness that comes from facing life's challenges side by side, hand in hand, heart to heart.